Right, jet setters. It's been a while since I've done any of these videos. This one's been on my mind for a little while and I've got to get out of my system. So this is my review of the RBA. And the reason is that tomorrow, it's in Friday, which is almost today, there is the results of a review of the RBA apparently coming out, and that review's been going since July last year by three esteemed people, and I'm convinced they're going to come out with something that's going to be a fucking joke, like a fucking joke. Anyway, so if you're interested in the RBA review and the dismal failings of our own RBA and why it really needs some significant overhauls, then this is for you. This is the actual RBA review that should be getting out there. Settle back. Here we go. The summary. Right? In 2022, Philip Lowe lost the RBA $36.7 billion, right? The estimates are it could be as high as 50, even $58 billion, right? That's 10 times the next biggest loss in Australia's history. And that was HIH, right? Adler and Williams went to jail. Lowe still has a job, right? Now, that loss left the bank, the Reserve Bank, technically insolvent and in negative equity. If it was a normal bank, right, it would have folded, disappeared. It's like the same, it's basically the same problem as SVB, right? But because they're so arrogant and they can just print as much money as they want, frankly, they don't really care. And the thing that people don't realise is that this negative equity, it does need to be recovered, and it will be. And the way in which they're doing it, there's two options. Either a equity injection of basically $20 billion from the government, or the other one, which is the RBA has decided and agreed with Chalmers to stop paying dividends to the government. So that's essentially, that is, taxpayers are bailing out the RBA. That's right, taxpayers are bailing out our central bank. If any other bank had been bailed out by taxpayers, there would be an absolute shit fight all over the media, right? But Australian taxpayers, they don't realise that they are bailing out our own Reserve Bank through foregone dividends, and that's going to. So normally the RBA pays the government, and therefore puts into the budget Australian taxpayers between $1 and $2 billion a year. They're going to forego that dividend for the next 10 years, right? For the next 10 years, right? That is going to be like $15 to $20 billion, right? That Australian taxpayers are missing out on because of Lowe pissing away billions of dollars, right? Now, the thing is that Lowe's been hammered in the press, partly, because of what he said. What he said didn't lose money. What he said kind of screwed people. But the reason why he lost this money wasn't because of what he said, it was because of what he did. And what he did was via two programs. One is a bond buying program or bond purchase program. And the other one was the term funding facility, the TFF, right? Through those two programs, he spent $500 billion. He basically lent it out to the market, as buying bonds or lending it via the term funding facility at 0.1% till up to the latest is June 2024. That's another 15 months away. So he basically went along $500 billion at the top of the market, the top of the bond market, and as rates rose, right, he's lost money. He's lost, and that's how he's lost up to $58 billion, right? Now, I guess you can say, well, you know, we spent that money, we got something, what did we get in return? Well, what did we get returned? He just needlessly ignited the house prices. It just sent the house price berserk, right? And it created record levels of fixed rate loans, right? And those fixed rate loans, they're now undermining the very work that increasing the cash rates is meant to do by creating that massive mortgage cliff that everyone talks about. So Lowe created this mortgage cliff, right? And now it's undermining the very effective of his own cash rate, and actually means he has to raise rates further than otherwise would be the case. So he's not just like ignited house prices, which has kind of screwed people because now they're popping. He's not just like locked people into loans which soon they are not going to be able to afford, but he's actually had to hike rates further than he otherwise would have because of what he did. And what he did was lose up to $50 billion, which is now the bill is being paid for by taxpayers. And to make matters worse, he's actually still lending out $188 billion to banks. That's still out there at 0.1% up until June 2024. Some of it rolls off in September, but it's not all gone until June 2024. That alone, right, is worth about $7 billion a year. And that money, what do the banks do with that money? They put it in what's known as their exchange settlement accounts. Right? They pay the RBA their 0.1%, which is on the term funding facility, and the RBA actually pays them roughly the cash rate in return, right? And that money just goes straight into the bank's bottom line. So the banks are getting basically 3.5% on $200 billion for free. That's $7 billion a year. And in fact, every time Lowe raises rates by 25 points, that costs the RBA or taxpayers, another $470 million a year. That's what's going on, right? This guy Lowe is still in a job. Why the fuck? Why the fuck is he still in a job? I'm not saying he should be in jail, but he should not be in a job when he has lost 10 times HIH. He's stuck taxpayers with the bill. He's deflected attention from what he did to what he said and said, well, you guys didn't listen properly, so he hasn't taken responsibility. And all we got for us was ridiculous house prices, which exacerbated a massive wealth divide in Australia, generated record levels of fixed loans, which are really going to screw people, and he's actually still doing it. He's fucking still doing it. He hasn't even stopped the crime, so to speak. That is the review of the RBA. And that is why Lowe must go. All right, now let's go to the details. If you want to turn off now, be my guest. This is really, as I said, for me to get it out of my system, right? These are the 5 big things that Lowe's failed on, right? And I'll run through them, right? The RBA mandate, right, which is, we'll come to that. Then how he basically jumped the shark with the lending, the term funding facility, and the bond purchases, right? And those risks were unmanaged and unmeasured, right? He left a trail of destruction amongst Australian people. He left a trail of destruction inside the RBA. And even after that, he hasn't taken responsibility. So he failed on the mandate. He did an absolutely stupid thing. He screwed Australian households. He screwed his own institution, and he doesn't take responsibility for it. He's got to fucking go. It's a joke, right? Let's look at the mandate. So the mandate for the RBA, there's 3 parts to it, right? Currency stability, which is actually inflation, right? Full employment and economic prosperity, right? Now, he failed to see inflation coming. He totally failed to see it. He had his head in the sand to the point where now we've got the highest core CPI readings in the G10, right? In terms of full employment, that is the result. We've got full employment at the moment, but that's not the result of the cash rate. That's because of the massive fiscal stimulus, right, which is the demand side from the federal government during COVID, and also the supply side issues of labour, i.e. closing the borders, right? You just have fewer people for jobs, right? All those cafes looking for employees. It's because like all the overseas students haven't come back, right? So employment, we've got full employment, but it's not because of the cash rate. And as far as economic prosperity goes, one of the things we'll look at later is he ignited house prices, which exacerbated the wealth divide to the extent where when rates were at their record lows, it was never more affordable to buy a house if you already had one, right? Because that means you didn't have to save for a deposit. If you actually had to save for a deposit, then you were screwed. You had no hope, right? So that's the prosperity that he created. If you already had houses, you were laughing. If you were trying to get them for the first time, you were screwed, right? And really what was going on there, there's this thing in the RBA, which is called the Martin model, right? And the Martin model is one of these creations of the RBA that they use to see how monetary policy affects the whole, how it flows through the economy, right? One of the key things in that is low interest rates lead to business investment. Now, that hasn't happened for 10 years, right? Lower interest rates have not led to increased investment in business for the last 10 years. In fact, business investment has been declining as interest rates have also declined. And the RBA knows this. They've actually released studies that say the link between interest rate, the cash rate, and business investment is basically non-existent, right? But still, when Lowe was giving the guidance of rates will be at 0.1%, he was saying rates will be at 0.1% until we see inflation coming through. And inflation will only come through when we see the job market improve and wages growth, right? So he was still living in the dark ages of like over 10 years ago, like 20, 30, 40 years ago in an economic textbook, ignoring reality, where he's under the delusion that if he lowers cash rate, businesses will invest, they will create jobs, that will create a labour shortage, wages will grow up, and wages will go up, and that will create inflation as people have got more money. That was his delusion, and it never fucking happened, to the point now where he's saying, well, inflation is like the highest in the G10. We don't want wages growth, do we? Because that'll only make it worse, right? This is how fucking delusion is. So he never understood the meaning of the word unprecedented, right? Right? He just didn't understand it. He didn't see what was going on around him. He didn't see that the old school thing, like 30, 40, 50 years old, of low rates, business investment, jobs growth, wages growth, therefore inflation. He didn't see that that was totally irrelevant, and in Australia has been irrelevant for over 10 years. So that's one fail. And the other fail is he didn't actually see that at the same time there was a massive fiscal stimulus and there was a massive supply side issue going on. And those factors drove jobs and inflation. And he was still pumping money into the market, right? He was still pumping into the market. So he failed on that mandate, this thing in terms of inflation. He failed to fucking control it. He failed to see the cause of it. He still thought the cause of it was something that hasn't happened for like 20 years, right? We've got full employment. That was nothing to do with business investment through the cash rate. And as far as prosperity, he just destroyed prosperity for so many. He just increased the gap between the haves and the have-nots. So he failed his own mandate, right? And on that alone, he's got to go. As far as the next thing that he failed, right, what he did in terms of yield curve control, that's buying bonds, right, and the term funding facility, that's lending money to banks, right? He put out $500 billion in the market. That represents about 20% of the entire Australian mortgage market, right? It's massive. It's obscenely massive, right? I mean, it's an extraordinary amount of money. Like JobKeeper was 200 billion, and we all think that was massive, right? The stage 3 tax cuts are going to be worth $250 billion, and we think that's massive. This guy put out $500 billion into the market to fix rates at 0.1% till mid-2024, and he's still doing it, right? Not only did that, but he didn't measure the appropriate risk. He didn't have an appropriate exit strategy for it. He ignored the previous lessons of the interventions in the FX market, which the RBA doesn't do anymore because it was basically a fuck up, right? So he went out and he did it without any limits, without any exit strategy, for an amount that was just obscenely, and blind Freddie could see it was, over the top. He didn't hedge any of it, right? And so as those rates rose, he just generated like a massive loss. And what was he trying to do with it? What was the point of that? The whole point was a deliberate effort, right, to lower fixed rate loans, to sucker people in for mortgages, to borrow more, right? So he deliberately manipulated the market to get people to borrow more at rates that were ridiculously low, right? that eventually they were going to have to come off and they were going to get screwed. Right? If this guy's a financial advisor, he would be in jail. If he was an advisor, he would be in jail, right? But instead, he's this fucking untouchable chief of the central bank, where he goes out, pumps in 20% of the entire Australian mortgage market to sucker people in to borrow more than was responsible for them, right? And they did it, right? And he turns around and says, "Well, that's your problem. That's not my problem. It's your mortgage, right?" He doesn't even have a mortgage, right? And he's just kind of fucked over these people. So he went way over the top with his strategy without any limits, and his motivation was, I think, criminal. Right? It was crooked. So the result of it is the cash flow, the trail of destruction in Australian households, right? Because there are hundreds of thousands of people on these fixed rate mortgages. They're going to come off. They're going to face increases of rates from 2% to like 7%. And at the same time, all these people, they borrowed 90%, right? House prices are off more than 10%, right? So they're going to be on negative cash flow and they're going to be in negative equity. Right now, going back to the GFC, one of the things that triggered the GFC were these things called adjustable rate mortgages, where these mortgages were sold with super low rates that lasted for a year or two. And then when people came off them, they went to some normalised rates. And of course, those people got screwed, because the whole premise was, well, when you come off for a rate that you can't afford, you can just sell the property and you'll cash in the bonus equity, right? Of course, that didn't happen. And that is exactly the situation where a lot of people are in now. So Lowe has created state-sponsored adjustable rate mortgages. Right? And he knowingly ignored these house prices. He knowingly generated these levels of fixed rate loans that he knew were not sustainable. He knew that the house prices were ludicrous. He knew exactly what he was doing, and complicit in this was APRA used to have a floor of 7% for the loan approvals, right? And as Lowe was lowering rates to record low levels, pun intended, APRA removed that floor, which meant that Lowe's lowering the cash rate actually took effect into the housing market, right? So APRA was complicit in that action, because otherwise Lowe, when he would lower these rates, he wouldn't have created the housing bubble, because people wouldn't have actually had to be able to borrow more. They would have had a higher disposable income, right? But they wouldn't have been able to borrow more because of the APRA 7% floor, right? So that was a critical thing that APRA were complicit in, right? And of course, the irony is that as much as Lowe and other central bankers were saying inflation is transitory, inflation wasn't transitory at all. The economic prosperity certainly was transient, whatever. And now all these people are kind of fucked over. It's just obscene. So he really has left an utter trail of destruction across many, like hundreds of thousands of households in Australia that he's screwed. And for no good reason. He didn't need to do it. He just went fucking over the top because he was relying on a stupid model that's been out of date for like 20 years. And he knows it, right? He knows the model was out of date, right? So that's the destruction that he's achieved. And taxpayers, of course, funded it, right? That's how he's fucked the Australian people. But he's fucked the RBA, right? Because the RBA, they are technically insolvent, right? And they are in negative equity. And the RBA is cancelling dividends to Australian taxpayers until that equity is recovered. Australian taxpayers are paying for Lowe's complete fuck up. They are paying for how he fucked over Australian households. They are paying for how he failed the RBA's mandate. They are paying for his stupid $500 billion that he lent out at 0.1% till the middle of 2024, right? And there's an arrogance in Lowe and the RBA board in that it is just totally irresponsible for any CEO to leave their organisation technically insolvent, and it is technically insolvent. The reason why it's technically insolvent rather than actually insolvent, right, is because it's the RBA, so it can print its own money, right? That's why it's not collapsing, right? If it was any other organisation, it would be dead and buried, right? As a CEO of an organisation, if any CEO does that to their organisation, they would be sacked without hesitation, if not jailed, right? It's appalling, right? I mean, this is the bank to the banks, and it's insolvent, and it's in negative equity, and it's being bailed out by Australian taxpayers, and all he's delivered for it is fucking over Australian people by creating a stupid housing bubble that was totally unnecessary and suckering people in for mortgages, which they are soon not going to be able to afford, if not already. And then despite all that, he doesn't take responsibility, right? There's a few clangers here, right? He's apologised for what he said in relation to statements about rates being low at 0.1% until 2024 and no rates before 2024, blah, blah, right? Those apologies have been half-assed apologies because it's said, well, I'm sorry that people misunderstood what I said. It's your fault, right? It's not his fault. But what he does in that, he takes attention away from what he did, right, by spending $500 million in setting rates at 0.1%. So what he said, right, about rates is actually what he was doing, right? His actions speak louder than words, right? And what his actions were he actually did put $500 million out there at 0.1% until June 2024, lost a shitload in the process, and then he kind of focuses on what he said. Mate, dude, what were you doing? You were doing exactly what you were saying, right? And by drawing attention, saying, well, I apologise for how people interpreted what I said, he's never once kind of turned around and said, well, actually, what I did was worse because what I actually did couldn't be misinterpreted. What I did was put out like 20% of the mortgage market at ridiculously low levels until 2024, and I'm still doing it via the term funding facility, which is still in place, and I lost $50 billion in the process, and you're footing the bill for it. That's what I did. He doesn't say that. And then even worse was that time-based guidance about what he said. The RBA's internal advice was explicit in saying don't give time-based guidance, make it linked to the market data. Lowe ignored that in his arrogance. He ignored it, and he went out and put that time-based guidance in. That was his doing, right? He ignored his own RBA staff. I mean, who does that? What kind of arrogant person does that? A fucking idiot, in my opinion. And then even worse, right? Before Senate estimates, right, he starts getting hammered about interest rate rises. And he has a hide to turn around and says, well, look, people will criticise me, but look, I'm just one of 9 board members, right? He fails to mention that he's not just any ordinary board member. He's not only the head of the RBA, he's the chairman of the board, right? He's the chairman of the fucking board. He's not just one of 9 board members. He actually is the head of the organisation, and he's the chairman of the board, right? And what's more, his deputy governor, right, who is inevitably always in lockstep with the governor, is also on that board. So out of those 9, one is Lowe, who's the chairman, then he's got his governor. So out of those 2 people out of 9, that's 22.2% of the board is essentially the one mind. Right? So he's not one of 9 anyway. More like he's one of 5 on those stats. But he's also the chairman of the Payments Committee, and also the Audit and Remuneration Committees also report directly through him. He is the fucking Scott Morrison of the RBA with these roles, right? He's the head of the RBA, CEO. He's the chairman of the board. His governor, deputy governor, is also on the board. He also is the chairman of the Payments Committee, and the other 2 committees, the Audit and Remuneration, also report through to him, right? That's fucking Scott Morrison, and he has the Scott Morrison routine of appointing himself to all these roles. And then Lowe has the hide to turn around to the Senate's Estimate Committee and says, I'm just one of 9. What a fucking cock. What a massive fucking cock. I can't believe people didn't hammer him for that, right? But he has never once really taken responsibility. And everything that he's done when people have been trying to pin him down, he's just found an out. He said, "Oh, you misunderstood what I said. You know, maybe I could have said it differently," without talking about what he did. I'm just 1 of 9, despite all these roles. You know, I did exactly the opposite of what my skilled people told me to do. He doesn't say that, does he? He does not take fucking responsibility after all those fuck-ups, right? So these are my recommendations, right? Given that Lowe had his head in the sand relying on that stupid model that's been useless for over 10 years, and he ignored everything going on around him, and then spent $500 billion to lose $50 billion as a result of having no framework or limits, requiring the RBA to be bailed out by those same taxpayers that he screwed through igniting a housing bubble and sucking people into loans they weren't able to service given normalised rates. Lowe must go. $10, actually probably $1 million, says the review isn't going to come out and say Lowe must go. They're a bunch of fucking cocksuckers, right? They're not going to do that. They don't have the balls. The whole board also needs to go because they sat on their fat asses and just watched this whole disaster unfold. I mean, look at Australia, like it's a mess, right? Low rates have not created business investment for over 10 years. The RBA doesn't face up to that. All rates do is ignite house prices and then pop the bubble. That's all interest rates do. The RBA does not admit that fundamental truth. They still pretend they're in some economic fairyland using models that just do not work. And the whole board, they had their head in the sand despite these models being failures for 10 years. None of them turned around and said, "Mate, I don't think it's time to put 20% of the mortgage market in there at record low rates when we've got a massive demand through fiscal policy, massive supply through the closed borders, issues going on, and they're going to, they're massive, right? And they will be transient, right? But these rates are going to lock people in for mortgages for the rest of their fucking lives." I mean, and that's a board decision. They all need to go because of that. The teams responsible for those economic models, they need to be replaced because they should have acted a long time ago. There is something fundamentally wrong with economic modelling within the RBA, that they themselves admit how much of a failure monetary policy is in terms of business investment, yet that governor still gets out in the middle of COVID and still relies on that false premise of we've got low rates, which we're going to create jobs through business investment, that's going to create wages growth, and that's going to create inflation, that's going to put it in our band, and that's the way we do things around here. That has been rubbished by their own research as far ago as like 2014. I've got a paper later on that I'll show you. What is that economic modelling team doing? Like, Australia is an economy that does two things, right? We dig holes and we build houses and buy houses. Interest rates do not influence miners to dig big holes, right? The thing that influences miners to dig big holes is commodity prices, and they've got nothing to do with interest rates, really. They don't care what their Gina Wino, she doesn't care what the cost of her loan is to fund the mine, right? She just cares about commodity prices. Because if the commodity prices collapse, then she's screwed regardless of what the debt cost is, right? And if they rocket, she doesn't care what the debt cost is because she's going to make a mint. Of course, she's worth gazillions of dollars, right? You know, and when interest rates are being cut because the economy isn't growing, what do you think a business is going to do? They're going to say, well, if the economy's not growing, why would I invest? Right? It really is that simple, right? And that's what's been happening for the last 10 years. The economy hasn't been growing. It's only grown through population growth. Per capita GDP is largely unchanged. More people, higher GDP. That's what Australia is, right? So you think those businesses, as the RBA says, well, the economy's not growing, we better low rates to stimulate business investment. Those businesses turn around and they go, if the economy's not growing, why would I invest? And of course they don't. They're staring the RBA in the face and they don't admit it. But households, on the other hand, they go, well, I can now borrow more. I can get a bigger house. This is fucking unreal, right? And that's the crack cocaine of the Australian economy. And the RBA, they pretend that they're still influencing business investment and therefore jobs and therefore wages growth and therefore inflation, which they are not. They're not influencing that, and they fucking know it. All they're doing is influencing house prices and household debt. And they know it, but they don't admit it, right? And that's their crime, right? The other thing is the recommendation. The board needs an independent chairman who's not the CEO. Like the idea of a bank or any well-governed company that has a CEO who's also the chairman, that went out the window decades ago, right? Fucking decades ago. But the RBA, one of the most important institutions in the land, what have we got? Fucking chairman and the CEO who's one and the same? Like, what is that? That's something from the fucking 1950s. I doubt that's going to be one of the... I mean, the review is going to... They're talking about making noises about, separating the rates committee, right? But sure as shit, they're not going to come out and say, we will appoint the CEO, as in the governor, that can be Philip Lowe, and then there's going to be a chairman and an independent board who's going to oversee the CEO, and when the CEO fucks up, the chairman is going to sack him. That's how normal companies work. And that's why Lowe is still in a fucking job, right? Because they don't have an independent chairman who can turn around and says, look at the damage our CEO has caused. He has to go. And then the last thing, which the RBNZ from the New Zealand Central Bank, which they've cottoned onto, go the Kiwis, is the RBA mandate needs to include house price stability and sustainable levels of household debt in its mandate, because everything else, as far as monetary policy, is a distant second. The number one influence that monetary policy has in Australia is house prices. Full fucking stop. That needs to be in the mandate, because that's the tool that the RBA has got, and that's all it controls. And their arrogant economist egos, their little pissweak heads will explode with that, because all of a sudden it's like, well, you're not really economists, you're basically glorified real estate agents, aren't you? Which is what the RBA is. They're the Department of Australian Housing. Their delusion about managing the economy and inflation, full employment, it's just bullshit. It's all bullshit. That's all fiscal policy, right? Business investment, employment, that's all fiscal policy, right? That's been proven over the last 10 years. Like it's so fucking obvious, right? The other thing that's obvious is that, again, over the last 10 years and longer, monetary policy is about household debt and therefore house prices, and that is it. And we do have stupid house prices on a global scale, and the RBA needs to take responsibility for that. So they're my recommendations. I think the official review, or the unofficial one as I call it, they might come out and they might touch on this as far as they might dance around that, but I think that's as close as they'll go. They really need to sack the whole fucking board. They need to sack and totally redo all the economic modelling. They really need to put house prices in their mandate. And Lowe, given his fucking disaster, he should be fucking shipped out and never spoken of again. He should be a case study at business degrees for saying, how do you really do a monumental fuck up? Because that's exactly what he's done. Look, I've got a few exhibits here. This is part 3. This is where some of the data comes. Look at business investment, Australian business investment. So this is like 2013, 10 years ago. Look at it, business investment. That's as rates has been low. What's happened to business investment over the last 10 years? It's one directional. The Australian economy hasn't been growing, so why would you invest? What, just because money's cheaper? Who fucking cares if money's cheaper? If the economy isn't growing, there's fucking no point in investing. It's as simple as that. Staring the RBA in the face, and they don't admit it. Here we go. This is this is a good article from the RBA themselves, right, in their 2022 report, right? This is their own words, right? This is basically saying, look, we've got an accounting loss of $36.7 billion, negative equity. The capital will be restored over the time, right? we're not getting a capital injection from the future, from the government, but instead the board's strong expectation is that future distributable earnings will be retained by the bank to restore its capital rather than paid as dividends to the government. The Treasury indicated support, knowing the situation will be really easy because he's got no, he's got no balls to kind of call them out for it. You know, it's just so, you know, so dumb. And even this, the combination of higher inflation and strong labour, you know, boards increased rates early more quickly than expected, right? You know, and that kind of shows, right, they're still in this kind of delusion, right? They're still in this delusion about interest rates, you know, having a link to the strong labour market. It just doesn't, it's just not there. It's a very distant connection. How's this one? This is an article, John Kehoe, Financial Review, writes good stuff, right? This is 12 months ago, right? The banks have borrowed extremely low fixed rates for the RBA for 3 years, right? As the cash rate rises, $430 billion in bank deposits, the RBA will earn a higher rate, right? So that $430 billion, that's a result of the banks, the RBA's bond buying and term funding facility thing, right? This subsidy could be worth up to $6.6 billion. It's actually more than that because rates have gone higher than what John Kehoe was expecting and the market was expecting back in April 22. This was him calling for saying, look, that ongoing subsidy of the TFF to commercial banks, it should be pulled, it should be cancelled, and they never fucking cancelled it. They haven't needed it for like over 12 months, and they've still had it in place. Why Lowe's still got it? It's a fucking gift to the banks. There's no benefit. There's no benefit. All it actually does is prevent the efficiency of the cash rate going through. This is a good one, the outdated structure. This is from the RBA website, their government, right? The governor, Philip Lowe, Payment System Board. Yeah, right, governor. Oh, there he is, the executive chairman. Oh, he's also there. So Lowe is there, Lowe is there, Lowe is there, Lowe is there. You know, Lowe's deputy is here. She reports to Lowe. This committee, they report to Lowe. This committee, that reports to Lowe. And the board, the pricing, that's the payments, I think it's the Payment System Board, the MPO board, they also report through to Lowe. So they all fucking report through to Lowe. It's the Lowe show, right? Where's the governance there? It's the fucking Scott Morrison routine. Point yourself to like 5 different ministries. I mean, this isn't a secret, right? But Lowe doesn't admit it. He says, look, I'm just one member of the board when it comes to this stuff. And you go, oh, but you're there, but you're there, but you're there. Oh, hello, you're there as well. Oh, these guys, well, they report to you. These guys, oh, they report to you. These guys, they report to you. Often audit committees and RAM committees, they report through to the board, all right? And they report to the board. But Lowe is the chair of that board. And also the people who work on these in those areas, right, they report through to Lowe in his executive role, right? And part of the idea of these in governance, these committees reporting through to the board rather than through to the CEO directly is to give them like true independence. You know, risk and compliance fucking reports through to Lowe, right? Lowe was the guy who fucking had no risk and compliance on putting $500 billion out there for 3 years and losing $50 billion. Now, this is from Senate estimates. Lowe isn't completely untroubled by the flag he's copying. He noted, this is the report of that committee meeting, non-stop round-the-clock media commentary with a nervous giggle, right? Lowe said it was a bit unfair that he cops the blame when his board of 9 members make collective and apparently unanimous decisions. Right? Fucking 9 members. It's bullshit. How's this? This is, I'm sorry, not sorry. Right? With the benefit of hindsight, the central bank may have injected too much stimulus. Well, the thing is, actually, even with hindsight, if he says he may have injected too much stimulus, he's actually still, at this point in time, he's still got $188 billion that 0.1% sitting with Australian banks, which is completely unnecessary. Why would you do that? You do that because you're a fucking idiot, right? That's all I can say. It's ridiculous. All these companies were called on to pay back JobKeeper, and a lot of them did. There's certainly the ability for Lowe to have said to the Australian bank, said, look, that $188 billion, you guys don't need that anymore. You might not like it, but you're going to have to hand it back, and that program is getting killed early because it's costing Australian taxpayers $7 billion plus each year. He hasn't had the balls to do that. He's just kind of left it still out there, and at the same time has the hide to say, well, we might have injected too much stimulus. He doesn't fess up and say, I'm actually still injecting lots of that stimulus. Honestly, what a fucking, how's this? Cash rate now hit 2.85%. Yeah, it's 3.6 now, about to go higher. Leaving many people on variable rates paying as high as 6 to 7% on their mortgage and struggling to make repayments amount with a higher cost of living. Isn't part of his mandate economic prosperity? That doesn't sound like economic prosperity to me. Fucking idiot. How's this? Oh, this is more about the RBA losses. Yeah, negative equity. It only had 24 billion in capital, and he basically lost twice that. He lost twice their capital. I mean, the numbers of this are astonishing. It's a massive fuck up. I can't believe he's still in a job, as you can tell. How's this? More on the RBA losses. The biggest loss in Australian banking history, $36.7 billion. Almost lost all of it's due to a $44.5 billion drop in the value of bonds. These numbers are astonishing. That's a lot of money. The loss means the bank will not pay a dividend to the federal government as it slowly rebuilds its own financial stocks, which could take several years. Estimates are about a decade. Right? And this $36.7 billion I'm talking about, that's just in 2022. They lost $4 billion the year before, and they'll lose more this year. What's this? Oh my god, unbelievable. Yeah, more about no dividends for a year for as far as the eye can see, not receiving dividend for the RBA. This is taxpayers bailing out the RBA. Reserve Bank will not pay dividends. It could ultimately cost up to $58 billion. So that 36.7, that's the low end. That's the low end. It could cost up to $60 billion. This is his delusional. This is delusion about the models that he is just totally out of whack. Right? Wages growth currently at 1.4% would have to lift above 3% to get inflation back to the bank's target of 2.3%. The last time wages growth was that strong was in 2013. 2013, that's a fucking long time ago, because since then business investment's been going down because the economy hasn't been growing because of a failure of fiscal policy. Lowe's been pushing a string on monetary policy, which has not led to business investment, which the RBA knows. Right? All it does is ignite house prices. It's unbelievable. We are unlikely to see wages growth consistent with the inflation target before 2024. This is our basis for the assessment that the cash rate is very likely to remain at its current level. So this is his real problem, where he's relying on low rates creating wages growth, which he knows, right, hasn't happened since 2013, right? This is being reported in 2021, right? So this is like 8 to 9 years after that. And he's still talking about we need to see wages growth. He hasn't seen wages growth for like 8 or 9 years, and he's still in this delusion. Mate, dude, it hasn't happened. What do you think's going to fucking change? What do you think's going to change? He's got his head in the sand. That's why he's got to go, right? There's a massive cultural problem with that idiot and all the people around him. Now, on one hand, they say, we haven't seen strong wages growth this strong to lift inflation since 2013, right? As if that's going to change through monetary policy, because he's been lowering rates since 2013 and it hasn't stimulated wages growth. And he's there saying, oh, well, we'll get there. That's what's going to happen. Of course, it didn't unfold that way at all. Like, there was no wages growth creating inflation. Wages growth had nothing to do with inflation. In fact, now it's the reverse. He's trying to stop wages growth. And inflation is like fucking record levels. He's an idiot. This is from the RBA's own statement, right? The board is prepared to be patient with the central forecast being for underlying inflation to be no higher than 2.5% at the end of 2023. And for only a gradual increase in wages growth. Well, he's sort of, I guess, right about the gradual increase in wages growth. This was like in 2021, he was saying inflation will be no higher than 2.5% at the end of 2023. How fucking wrong can you be? How wrong can you be? This guy gets paid $1 million a year. Inflation pressures are also less than they are in many other countries, not least because of modest wages growth. Dude, this is 2021. I could see, just looking on Facebook Marketplace, I could see prices of everything was going batshit crazy. Second-hand cars, I'm a musician, all the guitar stuff, I ride a motorbike, all the motorbike stuff was going crazy. Blind Freddy could see that inflation was well out of the bottle. Actually, you could see it in the middle of 2020. It was quite clear, like in 2020 when inflation was kind of popping. 2021 it was crystal clear, and this guy's still got his head in the fucking sand saying things. I mean, this is so stupid. No higher than 2.5% at the end of 2023. Oh, dude, how fucking wrong can you be? And inflation is one of the core mandates of the RBA, and he was so wrong. And he might turn and say, well, other central banks. But I said, mate, just because, like my primary school teacher said, mate, well, if your friend told you to jump off a cliff, would you do that? Right? Who cares if the other central bank people got it wrong? I got it right. I'm just a normal Joe. I went short the bond market. I made fucking a killing out of it, right? And I'm just like a normal Jack, right? And this guy gets paid $1 million a year, and he's got a fucking $1 billion budget of staff around him, and he comes out and says something that is so fucking wrong and so fucking moronic. And he still has a job. This is more about his delusion, right? The point I want to emphasise is that for inflation to be sustainably with the range, wages growth needs to be materially higher than it is currently, right? Wages growth, of course, happens through business investment, which creates a tight labour market, right? Which creates more demand for people and wages grow up, supply demand, right? And for 10 years, that has not happened. But he's still here in the middle of a crisis, right? Still thinking that this is relevant. How? His head's in the sand, right? He's just so out of touch, it's not funny. And of course, the damage that he created to his own RBA, negative equity, right? The bailed out by taxpayers, the damage he caused to households, which a lot of them in negative equity too, but they're not going to get bailed out by the fellow taxpayers, right? He's losing like up to $58 billion from a trade gone wrong, you know, all because he had his head in the sand and he's still got a fucking job. Here you go. This is from the RBA's own research. This is a paper, right? As a the capital expenditure decisions of many Australian firms are not directly sensitive to changes in interest rates. That's pretty black and white, isn't it? This is the RBA themselves. See, RBA themselves. Right, this is from June 2015. It's that old. They've known it for that long. The capital expenditure decisions of many Australian firms are not directly sensitive to changes in interest rates. Yeah, right. Oh, so there it is. 2015. And then we got like Lowe, back like in the middle of a fucking crisis, like thinking, right, that he's going to create inflation through wages growth, right? And that's, therefore, we're going to keep interest rates low. Continuing to emphasise that the record low interest rates fueling a surge in property prices, which he knows will be part of the landscape for several years, right? Because there is no prospect of a rapid wages growth. Of course there's fucking not, right? And he says, well, the official cash rate will remain at historic lows until at least 2024 because there's no prospect of wages growth and therefore no prospect of inflation. Forgetting that other things cause inflation as well, not just wages growth. $200 billion worth of JobKeeper, closing borders, supply chain disruptions across the entire planet. Well, they're not inflationary. He wasn't fucking listening. It's unbelievable. How can someone be so tone deaf? I mean, it's arrogance, fucking stupidity, whatever. Here we go. This is the other classic one. This is the RBA's much vaunted Martin model. Look at this, right? Interest rates, how it feeds through inflation, right? Interest rates, okay, they come through here, housing and equity prices and credit, they dwelling investment and consumption, they come through here into non-mining investment and mining investment, that creates fucking demand, that goes through the GDP, comes through the trade, gets through the labour market, wages, employment growth, it feeds back into like inflation and back into rates, right? Now we know, right, since 2013, boom, doesn't happen. Interest rates do not create wages growth. They even fucking said it, right? You know, no prospect of a rapid backbench in wages growth, right? There hadn't been for fucking, it hasn't been for a decade. Irrelevant. Yeah, they said the investment is not really, low rates don't help it. Scratch that. So you can scratch that, you can scratch that, therefore you can scratch that, you can scratch that, you can scratch that, you can scratch that, you can scratch that. That one, yeah, okay, legit, right? But all it is interest rates, dwelling investment and consumption. That's it. That's all monetary policy does. Like that part of their model. It doesn't do that. 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 It does this. And that's why their modelling team needs to get the arse, because they are still using a model where they know the link here is shit. They know the link here is shit. They know here the link is very strong. Why isn't it the only box on the whole fucking page? Honestly, he's got to go. It's so ridiculous. Here we go. This is another one. This is another paper. This is from 2018, right? Unbelievable. What is it? This whole paper, it's quite detailed actually. It talks about like a whole lot of things, right? But the conclusion that it does reach is that there's a whole lot of factors at play in terms of business investment, and actually these findings shed new light on the link between monetary policy and business. What they find is that like interest rates really have a very little, if not zero, influence on business investment decisions. It's much more to do with credit supply and lending standards and stuff like that. It's just, it's just fucking ridiculous. Read the whole article. It's ludicrous. They know it, right? They just fucking know it. Again, this is 10 years of business decline. That's the last 10 years, right? And this uptick, a bit more investment, what's that coincided with? Not low rates, because this has been rates going low. This has been that fucking fiscal stimulus, right? Fiscal stimulus. And I mean, you could argue that the whole trend is like top left to bottom right? Business investment in decline, and when you look at interest rates, they're basically been that way. Certainly over this period, interest rates have been plummeting over that period, right? And of course, where's business investment going? It's like a record lows. It's terrible. Look, the RBA knows it. This is from their own chart back. Look at this. Here we go, a couple of bonus exhibits, right? This is to put it into perspective. This is their losses. Australian dollar securities. Look at the losses there. This is the other things they've had on their balance sheet. Boom, like it's massive. Who lets their CEO take a position that can lose that much money? It's just ridiculous. This is the equity. I mean, look at the equity they pissed away. Between 20 and $40 billion now, it's minus 10. They should be up. They should be up at $30 billion. They are $40 billion over. They've dusted $40 billion worth of equity. $40 billion worth of equity they've pissed away. Like, over the pandemic. Pre-pandemic it was up at $30 billion. Now it's like worse than minus 10. $40 billion. Taxpayers are funding that. And this last exhibit, this is like my spreadsheet, right? This is the way the RBA modelling should work, and this is very basic. There's a few assumptions in it which are basic, like single incomes and there's Sydney house prices, but national wages, right? But I did this I first put this together probably 18 months ago to look at where the RBA could raise rates. So when I came to this, I said, look, if they go to 4.1, it's going to be a slaughterhouse. they go into a 3, that's going to be a squeeze. If they do it in the middle, it's going to be really painful. And of course, this is where they are now, where they're looking at pausing, which takes them back to the 1990s. And the thing, if you look closely, that's the killer, is when rates were at 0.1%, right? This is the repayments as a percentage of income, 28%, right? Record lows, right? So if you didn't have to save a deposit, housing never more affordable. This number here is the deposit to income ratio, never been higher, right? So if you had to, this is the economic prosperity, right, that Lowe created. If you've already got a house and you want to buy another one, walk in the park, never, ever, ever been easier. If you had a safer deposit, never, ever, ever been harder. And of course, now what do we got? We've got a rental crisis shortage. Why? Because people have not been able to buy their own houses, so they're getting squeezed by fucking landlords. And why are they getting squeezed by landlords? Because the landlords have they did this because it was so easy to buy more houses. They did it on tight finances. As rates have gone up, they've had to pass it through, right? So these people get screwed even more. That's what Lowe's created. What a cunt. Look, that's the end of my little rant and rave. I've probably used enough net memory on the computer. Look, I hope that is interesting for anyone that's bothered to wait to the end. For me, it's just getting it out of my system. I'd like to thank my wonderful broker, who I talk shit about like endlessly every other day about the RBA. It's been a big influence on all these. It's also great amusement. But really, Lowe, he's got to fucking go. It's what he's delivered, failing on his mandate, right? Pissing away $40 billion in equity for no good reason. The result is he's just screwed countless households. He's screwed his own RBA. The taxpayers are bailing it out. And even then, he doesn't have the integrity to fall on his own sword and admit that he's failed on the mandate. He's fucking pissed away equity to the point where it's got to get bailed by taxpayers. He's fucked over hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people through a trade which was just absolutely reckless, and that is still in place and still going for another 15 months. The guy, as far as I'm concerned, is an absolute fucking muppet. He's got to go. The end. Ciao.